It's been a good night talking about the state's business. We still have time to squeeze in a few phone calls if you have some thoughts on the governor's State of the State address tonight, or what you would like to see the state do more of or less of in the next year. Go ahead and give us a quick call. 615-737-PLUS is the number. Pat Nolan is here, as always, as our political analyst. Good to see you once again, Pat. I do want to look ahead and talk about the legislative session that's actually going to get underway tomorrow. We've already had that little small special session on education, but this is the big one.
Yeah, and before that they were in town because they had to get organized. The legislature has sort of a 2-year process. When they first come in, they get organized, and in the years when the governor's been elected, they swear in the governor. The Constitution says the governor is sworn in by the legislature. So if you want to know kind of what the pecking order is, that's at least in 1870, they drafted the Constitution, that's what they thought. And this is unusual to have a special session this early. It's sort of separate from the rest of the system, but they're going to get started with the regular order of business. There were a lot of bills filed. They'll go ahead and go through those. I don't know if the number of bills is as big as it has been. There was a move a couple of years ago when Beth Harwell was the speaker to limit the number of bills that at least state House members could do, and one of the reasons that kind of made a problem is that it also limited the Senate to some degree, because you have to have for a bill to really mean anything, you have to have a sponsor in both houses, and sometimes it was down to people running around looking for somebody to sponsor their bill because and everybody else was, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I've already sponsored all the bills I can sponsor down here in the House. I would imagine we'll see fairly quick action on some of these things. It used to be the legislature for many years used to stay here until, particularly in a non-election year, as we are this year, they'd stay here till at least Memorial Day weekend, sometimes into June. But since the Republicans have taken over, particularly when Ron Ramsey was the lieutenant governor from up in the Bristol area, he pretty much got him out of there he wanted to be out of there usually no later. It got to be after the 1st of April, he was ready to go. Of course, he also had to travel from Tri-Cities down here every week, and I think that had something to do with trying to get this thing wrapped up, so he didn't have to come out here too often. Now, Randy McNally is the current Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, State Senate Speaker, and he has to come from Oak Ridge, so he's got a distance to travel too.
What do you think has the most hope of passing this year?
Well, I think the constitutional carry bill has a very good chance of passing. The other kind of bills, they may be more into the meat and potatoes. I think they'll have a debate on what they're going to do on some of these things with what the governors should do or can do, future governors, about orders and things like that. I think we'll have a debate about that. And there'll always be some bill that will come up out of nowhere that nobody's paid attention to, that suddenly becomes a big deal and passes. It'll, like we had making the Bible as the official state book and things like that. Those things always come up every year and create sort of a controversy. So we'll see what all there's going to be. There are a lot of bills up there, and we'll see how they kind of work their way through, and they'll start to show up pretty soon. I'm sure there's a couple other things that I'm sure they'll be talking about quite a bit that don't come to mind. They'll probably start moving the budget, probably sometime towards the middle of March. Of course, we're a little bit late already. They'd already be in a session if they hadn't had the break, the special session the other week. They'd already be well underway. Usually by February, they're humming down there, and then they'll start doing that next week to get things moving. But when you start seeing the budget moving in the subcommittees, and you start hearing things like closing up the subcommittees, then that means they're getting within 3-4 weeks of trying to close up the whole thing. Because the one thing you don't want to do is have the legislature stay in after they pass the budget. That's usually when they get into bad bills. So they do, because the one thing the Constitution says the legislature must do every year is pass a balanced budget. And they do that every year because they have to. And once that's done, it's usually time for them to go home.
Let's get back to the phone lines. Jim is on the line. Good evening, Jim.
Hey, good evening.
Hi there. Go ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, I'd like to, one of the things that I noticed that the governor did not talk about, even though he's talking about money quite a bit, is the tremendous revenue loss that we're getting from not having marijuana legalized. And not only that, but the money that we're spending on having additional policemen do the job of chasing down people that shouldn't be chased down. And that's not being addressed. I was hoping that it would be addressed in this year's legislation. There's over 70% of the people in most polls that want marijuana legalized, and I was wondering if also, because it seems that legislators don't want to legalize marijuana in most states unless it's done through referendum, if there's any chance that we could get a direct referendum, if that's going to be maybe addressed in this year's legislature.
Yeah, great question, Jim. I think Is it Senator Dickerson who's always trying to pass this?
But his is always in medical marijuana. I think what he's talking about is recreational.
Yeah.
I will say this. I would think if there's 70% approval of doing that, it wouldn't be 70% among Republicans, and that's kind of what the governor and the supermajority in the legislature are looking at, because they're looking to keep the Republican base happy, and that would probably not be to do that with marijuana. So I don't see that happen. As far as referendums, I've never been to, this state doesn't seem to be one like California that has a lot of things in referendum. In fact, I'm not sure that state law allows for those sorts of things. Maybe it does, but I've never seen one on the ballot here. Now, we do have referendums that allow for changes in our Constitution. And in fact, there may be several of them coming up 2 years from now. They can only be on the ballot when the governor's up for election, either an re-election year or an election year. And the way they do it in this process, it's a little convoluted, and it had never been done before until we approved the lottery. But the lottery was, you have to have it approved by the legislature in one session, 1 2-year session, by a constitutional majority. Then before it goes on the ballot, it has to be approved by a 2/3 majority in the following legislature. So we've got several who've already passed the first part. We have to see if we can get the rest of them on there. And there's a number. I have to go back and look at the list again. But there's several. So we may have some of those kind of changes, but not the kind of. I mean, I suppose you could put a referendum. If you get the legislature to approve it by the process I'm talking about, you could put it on the ballot to have recreational marijuana that way. But I don't think the chances of that happening are very, very, very high.
The hill that medical marijuana has faced year after year is already high enough, so I would think that hill has to be crossed before we get to the recreational side.
And of course, Steve Dickerson's not back, so somebody's going to have to pick up the mantle on that, particularly in the Senate, to move that forward, and that's really where he's had more trouble getting that moving. There's been some movement in the House. It's one of those.
Even Beth Harwell was for it.
Well, she was at one time. Yeah, that's true, but they never were able to get it through the Senate. It's one of those things. It's a little bit like when they were trying to get the liquor stores to be able to sell wine, and the grocery stores to sell it. It took a long time to get that through, and finally they did that by referendum or approval within the counties, and that's how they got that done. How that would work with marijuana, I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of polling directly on. I think I've seen some polling on medical marijuana, which I think does have very high numbers, even in Tennessee, that ought to be done. But I have not seen any polls on recreational marijuana.
Pat, we just have 40 seconds. Anything that you can think of that Democrats will be able to get across the line this year?
No, the Democrats can only be effective in Tennessee if the Republicans are split. Then they can be a group that helps put together a coalition to get things done. That's what happened with the gas tax a few years ago. But they don't have the votes in either house to get close to doing that right now.
Pat, it's always good to see you. Thank you for your wisdom. We appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, we're going to come right back, wrap things up, and I will let you know what's on tap for the rest of the week. Stay with us.